Good morning. We're back again. This is session 2 of day 2, and subject matter that is very pertinent. Artificial intelligence. Have we got past it being a buzzword? I think so. But we're asking a bigger question today. Can it underpin the next generation of financial services? And with us, we have a great panel, so please stick around. I'm going to invite Tom to introduce himself and the panel. So without further ado, thank you very much, guys, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Johnny. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's a real pleasure to be here today with great, exceptional panelists that we've got to bring you some awesome insights around AI in the financial sector. So my name's Tom Allen. I'll be the moderator for this session. I'm the founder of the AI Journal, your free open source information hub on AI and emerging technology. And I'm really grateful to be here with 3 great panelists who I'll go on to introduce. So we have Assaf Ali, and Assaf is a business development manager at RazorLabs Enterprise AI division, which provides tailor-made explainable AI solutions to cross-vertical startups and MNCs. Prior to joining RazorLabs, Assaf served as a BD director in Tefin Management Consulting, enhancing its corporate and commercial footprint, following which he contributed to the commercial efforts of Future of AI and FinTech Junction by People and Computers. Assaf, it's great to have you with us today. Then we've got Omri Geller. Omri is the co-founder and CEO of Run AI. Omri co-founded Run AI in 2018 and currently leads all of Run AI's day-to-day activities, managing an executive team who are together responsible for the company's sales, business development, research and development, and marketing activities. Prior to Run AI, Omri served in the elite technical unit of the Israeli Prime Minister's office as part of the academic Tuda program of the Israeli Defense Forces. His background is in developing AI algorithms, and from that, Omri received his BSc and MSc in electrical engineering from Tel Aviv University. So it's great to have someone from Tel Aviv who's got a lot of experience from that place. And thirdly, we have Alla Gil. Alla is co-founder and CEO of Straterix, which provides unique scenario tools for strategic planning and risk management. Prior to forming Straterix, Alla was the global head of strategic advisory at Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, and Nomura, where she advised financial institutions and corporations on stress testing, economic capital, ALM, long-term risk projections, and optimal capital allocation. So a number of great speakers with us today. We're just going to get right into it, kick us off. Omri, Alla, Assaf, anything to say before we get into the questions? No, let's get started. So Assaf, I want to come to you first. And looking at AI in the financial sectors, could you please give us an overview of why explainable AI is crucial to the financial service sector?
When we try to understand applications in financial services of both AI and machine learning, not to say deep learning, we're approaching a system which utilizes advanced statistical models which are connected and give some sort of inference towards the decision-making process. But when we're dealing with that decision-making process, we are approving or denying credit scoring, loans, credit card, or credit usage. Without being able to understand what the decision actually involves and what the rationale behind that, it affects both the process and the results, not to say the consumer itself, the customer, the end customer of the financial institution.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. And I do want to bring it to the audience as well, which I forgot to mention earlier on. If you have any questions for Assaf, Omri, and Alla, please drop them in the comments box because we want to come back to them so we can get all your questions answered. So thanks. So thank you for kicking us off. And then Omri, I want to come to you and I want to get an overview of how do you see the adoption of AI in general and in the financial vertical specifically? Maybe you want to build on what Assaf just touched on.
Yeah, so actually we see that AI is growing quickly within enterprise across many verticals, and the main challenge, the first challenge that enterprises are going through is basically to find, I would say, the business case where AI can help and provide business value. And once they identify that use case, and we've seen that across verticals, they identify the use cases, and it's growing from quarter to quarter and year to year. We see the growth of AI within the enterprise, and specifically within the financials. This is one of the leading verticals for Run AI, as leading financial institutions are doing a lot of research around AI in order to to handle things like fraud detection, customer facing algorithms for how to better manage investments and so on. And once you identify those business cases, then we see it quickly growing within the enterprise. And again, specifically in the financials, we see it growing very quickly.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, Omri, because looking at the areas we look at, especially with the rise of big data and quantum computing, being able to manage large amounts of data, I think cybersecurity and knowing your customer is such a key thing, because it's just becoming so much more data becoming available on how to take a new customer journey. So I think those are really important points. Now, Alla, I'd love to come to you and understand, are there any underserved segments in financial industry where technology such as machine learning can help within perhaps corporate finance, funding, planning, M&A?
Yeah, so I think traditionally machine learning has been used exactly in the way how Assaf and Omri have described right now, relying on big data, and that was mainly anti-money laundering, cybersecurity, all kind of marketing usages, right? Where you have big data making kind of retail lending decisions on the fly. And obviously it was used a lot in program trading, right? Algorithmic trading. But all of that obviously requires big data. And the more data we have, the more kind of the better response you can get. But recently, more and more people started talking about using machine learning in the space where you have very little data. And this is a space of strategic decision making for the organization. And this strategic decision making is about, like changing your risk appetite, changing the strategic direction of the company, doing, like all kind of mergers and acquisitions, strategic hedging, and things like that. And this is the area where standard application of machine learning in financial sectors doesn't work because there is no data. But there is a new application, and this new application is about creating synthetic data where the data didn't exist before. And right now, a very critical question is, like, we weren't prepared for COVID. All of the stress testing that we were doing didn't help us to see it. What can we do, and can machine learning help in this respect? And in particular, if before this traditional financial application of strategic planning, financial planning, stress testing, all kind of sensitivity analysis would use just 2 or 3 forward-looking scenarios, right now everyone is talking about multiple scenarios. You need a lot more scenarios than you thought you did. These scenarios have to be forward-looking and unusual, and machine learning helps to do that.
Yeah, and I completely resonate, Alla, because when I look at how quickly these technologies within the financial services are developing, there's still so much we don't know. and still so much that we need to go learn and understand. And it looks at from maybe the ethical side of how we can apply this to big companies and apply this to the customer, right through to understanding what's the best way to learn these big data sets, because they're only becoming more. So it brings us on to a really great point. And Omri, I'd love to come back to you to see if you can walk us through the journey of building AI capabilities in enterprises, please.
Yeah, sure. So we've been working with enterprises in the last years, where they in different stages of the journey. I would say from the beginning, where AI is being discussed within executives, to actually the stage where AI is being developed and also deployed in production for customer-facing applications. And the journey, it has, I would say that the first thing that is super important within an enterprise or organization, because everyone wants to have AI, but there is a big difference between saying that you want to have AI as a buzzword and actually bringing those AI capabilities to production. So the first thing that we suggest organizations is to have some executive sponsorship, because there's going to be an investment in AI, and the return on investment is not immediate.
Yeah.
The return on investment would be significant, but it's not immediate. And therefore, the organization needs to take a strategic decision that there is going to be an investment in AI, and that's the first thing. The second thing, once there is such a decision, and this is a true decision within the enterprise, then the most important thing is to identify some business use case that should be the first business use case to try and solve using AI algorithms and capabilities. What we recommend is that this use case will not be a super complex use case, but would be a use case that other organizations in that vertical have already been solving or trying to solve, so that the chances for success are pretty high at the beginning, right? And then continue from there with every time identifying a new business case, and together with that, building those capabilities of AI development and AI thinking within the organization, so that when you grow the organization's use of AI, you have the knowledge of how to build AI algorithms to solve real business use cases. You bring the right people, you bring the right computing infrastructure, which is super important. We may talk about it afterwards, because AI demands a lot of compute to process these huge amounts of data. But you start to build the infrastructure for development and deployment together with identifying the right business cases for the enterprise. So to conclude, I would say there are the main steps. First, to get a strategic decision to invest in AI, then identify the first use case, way to solve it, then start to grow from there, and bring the right people, infrastructure, and start to deploy more and more AI algorithms.
Yeah, seems a pretty sensible roadmap and journey to getting a proper program going. And I think building off that, Omri, there's a really exciting point I want to come to Assaf about. And it's on the idea, and I'm very excited. I remember saying to Johnny, I'm excited to learn from the panel today around black boxes in the financial sector, because it's something I'll quite happily put my hands up. I don't know much about, but I'm very intrigued about. And I'm hoping, Assaf, we can get an overview of black boxes and why they are dangerous to the financial services. Because I think, as Omri really well pointed out, getting this roadmap, whether it's your infrastructure, the right people, what you want to do, and then you have aspects like black boxes popping up, you've got to account for them as well. So please give us an overview if you can, and why they can be so dangerous, please.
Thank you for your questions. So I come from a division in Razor, more to say I hail from a division in Razor which deals with explainable, tailor-made AI solutions. When we're touching on AI, ML, or black boxes, it's fair to say that the majority of people would be able to describe the dry process. We allocate the data, create the infrastructure of feeding the data. We run it through a pipeline, thus we create a model, and then we create some sort of inference the next level is to go towards deep learning. But the actual challenge that we deal with is not being able to understand why the model had created said decision that it created. Now, I touched on biasness on the previous question, and Omri and Alla gave wonderful insights. When we're trying to approach a customer which is related to financial industries, we try and understand their gaps and try and understand their business use cases and the situation that they're dealing with on a compliance level. If we're trying to approach actual use cases like know your customers verification and ID processes, such as we had created a long time, we have the ability to verify a customer both by facial recognition or by card ID, when we have the ability to both scan the actual picture of the individual, the holograms, the dimensions, the writing, and the encryption within the ID itself. But the end usage is the explanatory factor for the individual on why we'd recognize said individual. Thus, we're not only able to comply with the bank or any other financial institution regulation, but also to give tools to the individuals, the humans, which support the process in one way or another. In this specific usage, we have the ability to leverage more capacity, to support more customers, to give them better tailor-made care relevant to their needs. But more to say, we have the ability to encompass every complexity and not lose a very single gram of insights. The challenge with black boxes, deep learning itself, is that the higher we go in complexity of models, the lower explainability that we have. In Razor, what we do on additional divisions is a product that's called DataMind. It's a pipeline dedicated to create data analysis. It's utilized in Industry 4.0. These days, we are working hard out of experience on a generic explanatory AI product, which would give the ability to utilize deep learning abilities to financial institutions, but also explain any given process, be it risk assessment, be it know your customers and verifications ID, and moreover, we have the ability to work with consumer insights and customer journey.
Yeah, it's awesome, isn't it? How you can have all these data points and look right through it. And I always go back to the ones that are going to win are the ones that provide the exceptional customer service. And I think you touched on some great points there of making sure everything's in place to learn about that. And in my head, that comes back to machine learning, Alla. So I'd love to ask you, Alla, about what, and touching off what Assaf mentioned, what type of machine learning techniques are appropriate for strategy with explainability, and they must allow for human input and must allow, as Assaf touched on, making sure it's relevant and people can understand it. Yeah, it'd be good to understand, please.
Yeah, sure. I think, like what Assaf was touching on is extremely important. And a lot of people are talking about explainability, but one thing is explainability when the algorithm is making a decision for you. And in consumer product, quite often this is the case. So you just want to make sure that this is a correct decision, right? That you as a human would agree with that decision if you were doing it yourself. And, like I would say, you can compare that to, this self-driving cars, right? When with all of the data that you have and all of the technology and equipment, there is still a fear, will the algorithm make ethical decision, right? Humanized decision in extreme situation, right? It's all about more extreme corner type of situations when we are concerned that the AI or machine learning will go sideways, right? And when you are making strategic decisions for the organizations, they are even much more, they have much longer term consequences, right? So, you know, like if God forbid, machine learning algorithm denied somebody a loan, you know, like it's very upsetting, but the person can kind of call the bank and just say, look, this is unfair, why did it happen? And the human hopefully can correct this mistake, right? If AI kind of, you know, like recommended the bank management to have less capital than needed, it might be a much bigger and longer term consequence, right? And much harder to get out of. So from that perspective, these decisions, the final decision must be made by a human. And the algorithms just need to provide the human with the data, with the information, and expand human intuition that wouldn't happen otherwise. And I remember, you know, like many years ago, chess playing algorithms, you know, like couldn't win from a human. And then there was a breakthrough. They, you know, like they started winning. And then, you know, like about 10 years ago, the chess algorithm that was trained by human chess games was losing constantly to the algorithm that was just trained by itself, right? And there was a lot of conversation. Should we humans just agree that computers make better decisions, and should we just step back, right? But we are talking about extreme situations. So the difference between chess game and real life is, in real life, the chessboard changes shape all the time, and the rules are changing, and you get different number of pieces on the board all the time, right? So this is where the machine learning algorithms supposed to supply humans with the information that humans would not think about otherwise. And based on this information, human can make better decisions. So it must be explainable, obviously. It must be, verifiable. It must be really transparent, because humans who are making these decisions at the end of the day do not have PhDs in machine learning and other, hardcore methods, right? So they really need to understand why these decisions were offered to them, right? Why these actions were offered. And so most of the techniques are about showing people what can potentially happen and what the results of their actions can potentially be in a much wider set of circumstances that a human being would consider otherwise. Human beings have their bias, they have their kind of experience that tell them, but it's very hard to think for a human being about multiple combination of different circumstances and their consequences, that never happened before.
Yeah. And I think it's a really interesting point you make, Alla, because you're mentioning chess. And that instantly brought me back to the work DeepMind did with the game called Go in 2016. And from that, I don't know if any of the audience and if any of you have seen the video, and it's for free on YouTube. And it just blew my mind, not so much from how this machine can learn a pattern so quickly, so rapidly, and beat the world's best player at the time, but in a more sensitive view, the humility that came from it afterwards. You could just see the player was distraught. And I think you touched on a very good point of focus and knowing what decisions are ahead of us. A machine can look at everything because it's programmed to look at everything. Doesn't mean it'll necessarily make the right decision, but it can just be programmed to keep going, keep going, keep going. Whereas a person, you saw it clearly within Go, it brought out a whole new, better side to the people, I think, because there were new moves they hadn't come up with. There were new ways of playing the game. It made the player better. You could argue it changed everything. So without going off on a bit more of a tangent on a really exciting area for me, I want to bring it back to you, Omri, and with everything that Assaf and Alla have very well pointed out, could you please give us some specific use cases of AI in the financial sector?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Just before that, I want to say one thing about the previous answers is that really I think the most important, I wouldn't say the most important, but the important thing is to look at artificial intelligence algorithms and capabilities really as part of the toolkit for people, not as a substitute. There is a common mistake that in many things those algorithms should replace people, and there are things that it is better to give a computer to do, but in the majority of the cases, I think looking at those algorithms at the beginning as an additional tool in your toolkit for decision making is the right approach for AI. So that's on that. And then regarding the use cases, so obviously this is evolving. The use cases in general for AI, speaking broadly, we all know about the autonomous cars and everything that is being developed there when it comes to computer vision and things that AI can do. And in the healthcare, drug discovery and analysis of images for doctors and so on. And specifically in the financial industry, we've seen multiple use cases that recently are growing in the adoption. The first thing is here with us for many years, and it's everything that is related to, of course, to algorithmic trading. There are a lot of patterns in the financial markets that can be identified by computers in order to increase revenues. So everything that is related to algorithmic training is going through a revolution with the new capabilities of artificial intelligence algorithms. Things that are related to process automation in the organization. So this is not only relevant for the financial industry, but this is something that we broadly see, that organizations are understanding how to better manage the internal processes so they can be more efficient, of course. Specifically for financial institutions, things that are related to risk management are things that we see that AI algorithms become more and more used in those type of scenarios. So we actually see it growing quickly, specifically in the field of risk management in multiple financial institutions, multiple types, of course, of institutions that are doing risk management. And of course, financial modeling and predictions for managing customers' life cycle in the financial institutions are things that are starting to get at least recommendations using AI algorithms, so that people that actually help their customers to manage their financials can have additional tool in their toolkit to decide what is the best approaches for that specific customer, taking into account the historical investments of other customers that are similar to that customer.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was reading a book around, funnily enough, big data being used within a credit agreement, so allowing people to have further credit. And it just touched on how much, if you get into the wrong pattern, you can just be down a big spiral. And it was just looking at how the knock-on effects, and I think Alla and Assaf both touched on it, how making it ethical and understanding it explainable and making sure the people are making the right choices. But because before you know it, you've got some AI algorithm determining someone's lifestyle, determining how they can do it. So I think there were some really good points, Omri, on just some great use cases. And Assaf, I want to bring it back to you because Omri made some great cases around how it can be used, what we need to consider, and looking at complex deep learning systems. What abilities can complex deep learning systems give financial services, and maybe how can they affect the kind of topics that Omri just touched on, please?
So we have 3 points we need to touch on here. The first one is understanding that when we're approaching deep learning models, we are seeing a randomized pattern of relations between data sets, meaning that in the past we talked about AI and machine learning trying to mimic human behavior. At this current point, utilizing randomized methods or utilizing chaotic methods, to me, rises one stature above. But that being said, the question to be asked is what can we do for people and the financial institutions? I think that the first call to action should be to understand what the relevant neural network should be. Are we trying to analyze the relations between the data sets? Are we trying to analyze the fluctuation of income for said potential loan? Yeah. Thus, we enter a case-specific world, which is called NBO or NBA, next best offer or next best action. A model which is fully client-facing and gives the relevant insights to take care of the relevant client and the relevant financial transaction he or she are trying to make on an ethical level in a complete cycle.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think looking at that, I'd like to come to you, Alla, and look at what does human and machine symbiosis look like in the decision-making process, please?
So this is a very interesting process, right? So on one hand, humans invented artificial intelligence and teaching machines how to be more human, right? How to make decisions that, like how to help humans to expand their intuition. But I think what's very interesting that artificial intelligence is teaching humans as well, is teaching people a lot more about how to make decisions based on probabilistic assumptions. And on one hand, we are making these decisions every day in our life, right? Yeah. Just to give you an example, right? Very few people actually had their house on fire, but everyone has a fire insurance on their house, right? Because they understand that even though the probability is small, it's very real and it can be extremely destructive, right? So you can't just leave it alone. But at the same time, nobody has a fire crew sitting in your backyard just in case, right? So we kind of measure the probability and the action that is required by that probability, right? You install smoke detectors, you install like fire alarms and stuff like that. If some of that goes off, if you smell the smoke, then you call the fire crew, right? And this is all decisions driven by probabilities. But, regular people who are buying houses, they might not even think about these probabilities. It's just common. This is how they do it, right? But these are decisions driven by probabilities. And when you are making a strategic decision for your organization, you really need to understand the ability of the event that you are making decision about, right? So machine learning, AI, the full distribution of potential future outcomes. And, the results of the decisions, multiple decisions that you are making and how they impact this distribution of the outcomes, right? And that is teaching a human about the probability. So it shows the human that this type of scenario is like a fire in the house. I don't do much today, but I keep watching. And I know exactly what I will have to do if the probability of that increases, right? So that is, I think, the core of the symbiosis between human and machine, that humans are teaching machines, but machines are teaching humans. And I bet you that, like 10 years down the road, the senior management of various organizations will start talking in terms of probabilities, right? It will become a much more common language than it is now.
Yeah, really great points. And I think that's a really good one, Alla, to kind of get this panel wrapped up. But before thanking you, and I've had a great time with each of you. I've learned something from each one of you. I want to leave each of you, give you each of you 30 seconds to leave the audience with a quick question for maybe what they can ask themselves. So if someone from the audience here, or someone who watches the recording, if they're looking at implementing AI into their software, into their company, and they're in the financial services, what would Omri, Alla, and Assaf be your one consideration point for what should they ask themselves? What's most important to them? And Omri, I'd like to kick it off with you, please.
Yeah, so I think that going back to what I said, to me, the most important thing that I would suggest any organization that's getting into AI is to identify the right business use cases that can bring value using AI and grow from there. There are many use cases, and each of the people here that on this panel just need to ask themselves, what are the right use cases that they can now improve my business using AI algorithms, and even consult with people that already started this journey to identify that use cases, and then start to invest and grow from there.
Awesome. And Assaf, what do you think?
My personal point of view suggests that the first thing you'd need to implement AI within the organization would be the case-specific factor that would bring immediate value to the organization. Otherwise, it's preferable not to touch on that. Involving AI within an organization is a complex process. There needs to be a complete understanding of the customer, the business situation, their infrastructures, and their needs. Once we have a gathering of said, only then we have the ability to discuss an initial conversation with the customer. When we try and work with AI, the SME, which understand the use cases and the needs within the organization, are the organizational stakeholders, the VP R&D, the CTO, the CEO, the innovation manager, director, or VP. When you have the ability to understand the world of the problem and you involve the relevant individuals for the relevant use case, then you can incorporate AI. In the world we live in today, competencies are near to endless, and we can work with almost any type of data or any type of sensor. The question to be asked is, what do we need to work on and how?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Alla, final one to you.
Yeah, I would say that people need to take into account that a lot of machine learning algorithms, when they establish some dependencies between the different data points, these dependencies are static. And we assume that they continue in the future. So if you are using AI or machine learning, when you're making strategic decisions, you have to take into account the fact that you need to incorporate the methods that are dynamic enough, because as we've seen, when major shocks happens in the market, or natural disasters like COVID, all the relationships are changing, and it's very difficult to capture that using standard methods.
Awesome, awesome. And I think that's an awesome way to wrap it up. And I just want to say to the audience, thank you for joining us today. And to Alla, Omri, Assaf, truly appreciate you being here. Johnny for organizing it. Learned a lot for a Tuesday morning, and I've still got a whole day ahead of me and going to be taking a lot of this away to digest over the coming weeks. And just want to say a massive thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Alla, Omri, Tom, and Assaf. And I think the prize for the best background definitely goes to Tom. If you can, show your appreciation, that we have an emoji button at the bottom. If you can show your appreciation to our esteemed panel. Thank you very much for sharing your insights and thoughts. Thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you for being with us this morning, and hopefully we'll do this next year in person. Thanks again, everyone else. If we our next session, if you